What's up, everybody, and welcome back to the show. Gabe, Yanez, and I, we are joined by a special guest today. We have Anne Mahlum on the show. She's the founder of Solidcore. She's also a wife. She's out there doing all kinds of keynote speaking. She founded a nonprofit, and I'm super excited to dive into all things. It's funny. I was doing, a significant amount of research, Anne, about like your background and what was going on. And I texted Gabe. I was like, Anne is absolutely incredible. And I cannot wait to dive in. So thank you so much for taking the time today. We really appreciate it. We can't wait to, share your experience from starting a nonprofit into exiting from a business and now doing what you're doing. So welcome.
Yeah, thank you. My pleasure. Excited to be here.
Awesome. So I think a great place to start, I think what I was most inspired by is the carryover between what you did with your initial nonprofit and with your background, with your family's background of addiction, your father's, and how you started this run club for homeless. Because I was talking to a buddy of mine about this, and I said, oh, she started a nonprofit to support the homeless. And he goes, oh, so you mean she fundraised and then donated to the homeless? I'm like, no, dude, she started a run club with the homeless. And so I'd love to just start there because it's such an incredible pursuit that you had. And then where is that now?
Yeah, it's funny. You're not the first person that's had that response from somebody. I remember when I was calling the media in the early days and trying to get them to do stories on the organization, and they had the same question of like, you mean you're having a fundraiser for the shelter? And I'm like, no. So it kind of breaks people's brains, right? And that's actually a big part of what stemmed the curiosity and helped the thing grow so much. Because when you think about somebody who's homeless, most people have the reaction that that person is lazy, doesn't want to work very hard, drinking all day, whatever, a screw up. And when you know somebody who's a runner that especially runs in the morning, you have the exact opposite view of who that person is. And so people didn't get it. And we used that storyline as like such leverage to get meetings, and media was so interested. But yeah, Jason, I think also most people's careers, they make a lot of money and then they start a nonprofit. And mine was the exact opposite. I was just so freaking desperate for fulfillment and meaning in my life in my 20s that, when I had this idea to start this running club for the shelter that was really close to my apartment, it was just almost like I finally felt alive after 2 years of searching for what is it I'm supposed to do with my life. And as you said, my dad's an addict, and, that really ripped apart my family as a teenager. And it was really shocking. Addictions, if anybody knows about them, that they thrive in the darkness. And my dad owed a lot of people a lot of money, and it was all coming to the surface. So it came out very quickly, and none of us had any idea. And my mom, unfortunately, went through my dad's addictions with drug and alcohol with him. And so for her, this was just I can't do this again. And money was her Achilles heel. So she kicked my dad out of the house. And I spent those years as a teenager being really angry at my mom for taking my dad away, and having a lot of sympathy for my father, who we just had a really special relationship around sports. And I wanted to fix him. I wanted to make it better. And I just was unsuccessful at that. I also learned that you can't force anybody to change. You can give them the opportunity to, which is, of course, what happened with Back on My Feet. But Jason, one thing that you mentioned I'm a speaker, and a big part of my story is I remind people the power of their beliefs about who they are. And I have vivid memories from when I was a teenager telling myself that I'm going to be somebody someday, that I'm supposed to do something big. I don't know what it is, but I constantly was thinking about it and ruminating on it. So when the opportunity came with Back on My Feet to start this running club, it was oh my God, this is what I've been asking for. This is the idea. And, it's a longer story, and people can go search and find more context on it. But long story, a little bit less long, is I ended up convincing the shelter to let me start this running club. I got 9 guys to join. and made them sign a dedication contract that said they had to be there every day, be on time, and come with an excellent attitude. And I was going to track all of that. And I kid you not, like, these guys, I felt it. Like, they were waiting for somebody to expect excellence from them. And it's the first lesson in leadership that I speak about is be the type of leader that helps people believe that they are capable of excellence, and you will be amazed how people tend to show up. So guess what? These guys came out every day. They were on time, and we created a community that they wanted to be a part of. So they kept coming and they kept showing up, and pretty soon it grows and gets bigger. And I realized this really is what I'm supposed to do with my life. So I go all in. I walk away from a big corporate job opportunity, and I start building and growing and learning and screwing up and learning and all the, screwing up again. And yeah, we built this national nonprofit that's operating across the country.
Man, it's such a cool story and such a cool angle, specifically because I think that unfortunately there's groups of people that just kind of get discarded as they can't be helped, or like it's kind of like on them to turn things around. As you were talking about it and as we were reading about the nonprofit, I was thinking a lot about, on a flight I just ended up watching. You ever seen 26 to Life, the documentary on the San Quentin inmates that run the marathon?
Yep.
And that was such a powerful story too, because you never even get a chance to like hear the stories of people that clearly, made some bad decisions and are paying for the consequences, whatever that is. And it's so easy as an outsider to be like, well, that would never be me. But I feel like sometimes with those stories, you realize that it was such a like small moment or small circumstance that, just threw their life in a different direction. And for them to have something to get out of it or find meaning again, or like you were saying, find excellence, it's really, really cool. I can see why it took off. And it's so funny. I can completely see why everyone would assume that it's just like, people running to raise money for people because they think that like that's what solves a lot of issues. And you go into that discussion too, right? Like money doesn't solve a lot of problems. People need purpose, right? People need like something to do.
Yeah. And it's the old adage about like, you can either give a man a fish or teach a man how to fish. And I guess have to circle back to like the belief systems. We got these guys to change their identity, Gabe. And I try to relate it to the audience. And I'm like, guys, think about when you don't feel good about yourself, or you're saying negative things to yourself over and over again. Like, you're not going to change if you don't think that you're capable of change or deserving of change, or that there's something better on the other side. So these guys who are constantly reminded of their homelessness and their screw ups and their past, that they're living in a shelter with a bunch of other grown men. And I see the way that they were treated in the shelter from, frankly, some of the staff. And it was like almost verbal abuse, that like, you're nothing, you're this, and I'm like, we have to get these guys to think of themselves more positively. So what happens? Well, now they're a teammate. Now they're a runner. They've shown that they can make positive decisions. They can set goals and reach them. They're disciplined. They're reliable. They're dependable. And so what we started to do was build relationships with employers and be like, these are people you want to hire because of these attributes. And we have 6 months of data to show you that Joe never missed a run at 5:30 in the effing morning. Never late, positive attitude. Like, so we didn't call people and be like, oh, we're this nonprofit charity, can you do us a favor and hire our members? We became like their networking resource based off of their characteristics and how they were showing up. So when you break it down, it's really easy to see why it works so well, but to skip over the entire emotional well-being of people, it's why I first tell people when they're down on themselves, I'm like, Jason, I know you do this too. It's like, start working out. Like, the best thing you can do is start working out, and you're going to start to feel better. You're going to start to look better. And if you do it in the morning, then you're going to make a next positive decision at 10 a.m. because you already made a positive decision. Like, it's just such an easy formula for a positive domino effect.
Say it louder for everybody in the back. It's like, I totally agree, that starting off the day that way is so important. I trained earlier today, and it's just like, it just starts you off. But I want to dive into something that has been a talking point, for lack of a better term, here at Train Hard, has been this idea of alcohol. Since the beginning of the year, I haven't had anything to drink, and Gabe doesn't drink. I did, right? I haven't in the last 2 months, and I plan to reintroduce it with my wife. And it's just a part of our lifestyle. We want to reintroduce it in our way. But you said something on a podcast I was listening to, and you wrote that that you think people that work out actually drink more. I don't know if I don't want to take that out of context, but that there's carries over between the, dopamine and that workout kind of push, and then some of these kind of cravings for alcohol. I'm wondering, what have you seen in terms of like exercise, addiction, alcohol? What advice do you have for balancing those two and those type of personalities?
I think you need to know yourself well enough to know if anything that can do damage to you is something you can do in a way where you have a healthy relationship with it. And we all know if it's I really think we all know, right? If it's consuming our thoughts, if we feel guilt, if we feel shame. And, my relationship with alcohol started to evolve back in 2022 when, I never really thought much of it because I work hard. I was really successful building a company. I work out, like everything was there. So alcohol was always a reward for me. At the end of the night, pretty much every night, I was having a drink or two. And I didn't really ever want more than that. And I never had more than that. But I was like, fuck, that's 60 drinks a month. Like I'm having 60 drinks a month. And I'm like, I got to just actually see if I can not do this. It became so habitual. I never wanted to drink during the day. I wanted to drink at the witching hour at 6 or something o'clock. And I think a lot of people think that, you don't have an alcohol problem until you lose your job or it's messing with your relationship or it gets so bad that you have to take it out of the equation. And I wanted to not consume my thoughts with it. I wanted to be like, when's the last time you had a drink? And I wanted to be like, I'm not really sure. So I'm a little bit like you, Jason. Like I haven't cut it out completely, but I am much more mindful of why do I want this? And do I want it for the right reason? Do I just like, cause I love the taste of a spicy margarita. I really do. I don't drink wine. I don't drink beer. I don't really like the taste. It's not about getting drunk. It's about the experience. So right. I will be very calculated, but it's actually been proven, and I don't remember where I read the data, but yes, people who work out all the time, and it is rampant in the fitness industry. Like I see Barry's, partner with tequila, and they have these, and I'm just like rolling my eyes. Even Lifetime, which I love my gym, but they have a bar like in the gym, and it's all like, oh, it's all about balance. And I'm like, guys, let's just call it what it is. The shit is poison. You're not serving Coca-Cola in here because you think it's bad for you. Like you would never serve Coca-Cola, but like you serve alcohol. And so I think just like the wake up call and people just stop pretending that it's okay. Be like, the shit's poison and we should all know that. And if we're going to engage with it on a basis, just know what we're putting in our body and, check yourself. If it's becoming, a bigger issue. So I'm really glad that I did 90 days because 30 days wasn't enough. I felt like 30 days, I didn't get over the habit. I was sort of like, oh, I'm, great. This is over. I'll check the box and go back to drinking. I really needed 90 days. And I'll tell you why. 90 days, there's somebody's birthday. There's a celebration. There's a holiday. Like you kind of check all the boxes, and the alcohol industry has made us feel that alcohol is your friend when you have a stress day, when you're celebrating, when you had a long day, when it's a ball game, when it's a Tuesday, when you're getting together for book club. Like literally every scenario, they have figured out how to tell us that it's just a little bit better with alcohol. So I just wanted to be like, I'm not going to be influenced by all of that. And I need to start thinking for myself here.
I love how you explain that. And I love the fact that you also haven't cut it out completely, because that's been a chat that like me and Jason have been having a lot about, because this all came from us wanting to like plant our flags on if we were to give like a very simple nutrition and lifestyle handbook to the people that do our training, what would we include in that? And alcohol was something that I felt strongly about, not in that everyone needs to cut it out completely, but to your point, like, I think you can learn a lot about what your actual relationship is with it by cutting it out. And it's funny you mentioned 90 days because our protocol is 12 weeks for that reason. Right. You can't go 12 weeks without something happening that is really going to force your hand on, oh, wow, like I really, really want this right now, or no big deal. And that in itself is just such a powerful data point, to your point, to say, hey, I am going to reintroduce this, but I'm literally only going to do it when, I share a wine tasting with my wife, and that's a really big deal for me. When there's a big birthday and I want to celebrate that, or I just genuinely enjoy the experience of a spicy margarita. That is, I think, perfect examples to where it can fit into a healthy lifestyle with good diet, good sleep habits, and all of that. But I think that you hit the nail on the head with most people, I think, tell themselves that they have a very different relationship to alcohol than they actually do. And the only way to actually figure that out is cut it out for 12 weeks. And I think you'll learn a lot.
Yeah,
and
completely.
I love the fact. So just selfishly, or for me, because I took it out January 1st, for example, we had the Super Bowl that came up, and that was a really good example of like something like normally I'd be, and Bud Light was a major sponsor of the Super Bowl. And you're like, oh, I want to have a beer. But what's really interesting is that, there's a lot more emphasis, I feel like. So for anybody listening right now, I've been out 2 months. I plan to reintroduce it with wine tasting, but I've been really deep diving in non-alcoholic beverages just for the hell of it. I'm like really curious. And now you have Stella, you have 805, you have Corona. All of them have non-alcoholic versions of those beers. So it's becoming more accessible. But anyways, one thing I definitely want to dive into is this idea of following your purpose and having passion and desire. Like, the reason why I think it's so interesting for you is that you started off with a nonprofit, really helping this homeless community get back on their feet through exercise, which I like absolutely love. I think it's so incredible. I host a weekly men's club where we do this in a parking lot. A lot of similarities in terms of like just getting people together and trying to break down the barrier. But I like the way you made them make a commitment to you in a sense. But I wanted to talk about Solidcore and going from nonprofit to then, and I want to quote this because it's on your Instagram. I just found it so powerful. I really resonated with it. Was I opened my first studio today, and I remember saying something similar-ish to myself when I opened my first CrossFit gym in 2008. You wrote, I opened my first studio today. This is like your handwritten on a letter. I'm going to build an empire. I'm going to open 100 locations, and then I'm going to sell the company. I could do this. I know I could do this. And then the crazy part is that was in November of 2013. Fast forward in 2023, if I'm not mistaken. So 10 years later, you exited from your business at, if I'm not mistaken, around $100 million, give or take, buyout. I love the fact that you've foreshadowed, like you put into, just talk us more about that post. I think it was powerful.
Yeah. So, the reason I left Back on My Feet was because, I value growth, and I'm someone who likes to elevate and feel like I'm building like this, right? I'm an entrepreneur. Like you make us be still or stagnant, and like it's death. And at Back on My Feet, I had felt like I've elevated myself, meaning like my role is not going to change. Like, I have to be the one to go raise the money, open the chapters and whatever. And I did it 12 times. I'm like, the system, the structure, the process, everything is in place. Just like continue to go do it. There's nothing really left for me to do. I really felt that way. And I wanted to be like, can I build something? And I wanted to own something. You don't own a nonprofit. It doesn't belong to anybody. Everything goes back into the organization. I wanted to own something, and I didn't know what that was going to be. I was searching and opening myself up. And then I found Pilates, and I was like, holy shit, nobody knows about this. Like, I work out all the time, and I didn't know you could work out like this. It was really hard, and I loved that. And I was so sore in all of the places that like I was trying to target, and we were moving so slowly. I'm like, I thought I had to jump, pound. I thought I had to beat up my body like it was a rite of passage to be injured, to be fit. And I was just like, there's something here, and nobody has built a brand around this. And like, this is my specialty. This is a game that I think I can win. So I had that level of gumption of just knowing, like, I think I can do this. However, Jason and Gabe, like when I was, I had 175K, had saved that over the 6.5 years of Back on My Feet from speaking, my salary. I just started stacking money away, and I was going to put it all in to open Solidcore. And I was talking to a friend of mine who happened to be a bigwig at Accenture, and I was like nervous, and he's like, you know what, Anne, I'll give you 75K for 30% of Solidcore. Like, I saw what you did with Back on My Feet. Like, you raised a ton of money for homeless men. Like, I think you're going to crush it. And at the time, I'm like, wow, this is like, I should consider this. 75K is a lot of money. And that way, if, it doesn't go as planned, at least I didn't bet the farm. And the moment that came out my mouth, I was like, man, like, I'm already doubting myself. If I have the money to do this on my own. And if I take this money, all I'm doing is putting a quarter in the doubt jar that like, I really don't believe enough in my capabilities and myself. And when shit gets hard, I'm going to actually put another quarter in. And I might be like, oh, this is too hard. At least I have 75K. Like at least I didn't, put all my money in. And so the moment that I was like, nope, I'm doing it all myself. All my chips are in. I opened my studio. And that's when like I wrote that down, Jason, because I said, I need a vision. And I need a specific vision. I think a lot of times people be like, oh, I want to build a company. I'm like, that's not specific enough because you're never going to have an ending. You're always going to want more and you're never going to feel successful because you didn't set out the specificity of what does the Super Bowl look like, right? What does winning the Super Bowl look like, as we're staying with the sports theme? And that was my Super Bowl. And I'm like, I have the skill sets and every decision became easier because if a decision when we had 20 studios, someone wanted to buy us at that point. And I'm like, no, like that is not in support of X, Y, and Z. I had to go through a massive lawsuit with my machine developer and make my own machines because I'm like, if I don't do this, I'm not going to reach this goal because this guy determines where I can open studios because he's my machine supplier. Like I need to build my own. So it just became so much simpler when you have a clear, specific vision on where you want to get to, and all decisions either are in support of that or they're a distraction. So I found it really, really helpful. And to your point, yeah, it was 9.5 years later when I sold it when we had 99 studios. We opened the 100th studio like a week after the deal got done.
Go ahead, Gabe.
Well, I was going to say, how do you have, because it's easier said than done. It makes a lot of sense why it was so powerful to have the clarity of, hey, this is the end goal. This is what success looks like, and let that dictate all your decisions moving forward. But how do you have that clarity so early on when, the end goal is so far away that I can completely understand how many people would have struggle, like actually like saying, this is what I want to get to. And also on the flip side, have struggle with moving that goalpost either further out or closer in as the journey either gets tough or you have early success that maybe is exceeding your expectations. So what helped you with the clarity and then also the discipline to like, hey, I set out for that to be the goal. I'm not going to sell at 20 locations. And I'm also not going to get close to that goal and be like, well, maybe I want to move it further down the line.
Well, for not selling at 20, I just didn't think I didn't think I had done my part yet. Like we weren't in all markets. We weren't on the West Coast. Like there was just so much that we hadn't done that I felt was my responsibility and where my talents lied. As I always say, like I'm a really great founder and I'm a really great first phase CEO because in the first several years is like the make or break of the company, right? It's like you're either going to make it or like it's not going to work, it's going to get too hard, it flounders and whatever. And I was ready to sell, Gabe. We had 75 studios in February of 2020. So we were going to get to 100 studios by the end of that year. We had 31 studios in development. I hired a banker and it was like, awesome. Like we are close in sight. Like let's start this process and probably a deal will get done, summer-ish. And so close-ish enough. And then COVID hit, and it was like overnight, obviously we all remember everything. Like you don't ever plan for zero revenue. We always forecasted of like, okay, 5-10% here, there. And I wasn't going to sell the company at a discount. And I also at that point was ready to promote my COO to CEO so I could transition into the exec chair role because again, all the system processes, everything was done and set. Like I no longer needed to be involved in the day-to-day operations. But when COVID hit, it was like, great. Like I'm a little bit of a wartime CEO. Like I know how to manage and handle crisis and think differently than how other people are thinking. And I swear you could ask my team and say, at any point, guys, did you ever feel from Anne that like the whole thing was going to crash and burn? And they'll be like, absolutely not. There was nothing that was going to come in Anne's way of like getting through that storm and like getting through it, frankly, better than anybody else, because it was like, what are the opportunities that people are missing? You know, if you remember in those days, everybody was like, oh, fitness is dead. The gym is dead. I mean, Jason, I'm sure you remember this because you have gyms. And I was like, what a bunch of bullshit. Like this is a moment in time, and no different than after 9/11 when everybody said no one's ever going to fly again. Like, the human brain forgets easily. It's why women have multiple children. And we want to be social and come back. So when everybody else was spending money and trying to go digital, we were like, let's go fundraise. Let's raise money and let's start expanding, and let's open up in red states because there's way less restrictions. We were already starting to see our studios that were in red states coming back in like droves and wait lists. And I'm like, we need to more populate in those areas and have more options for folks. So we went on offense. We raised $15 million and we opened 11 studios in 2021 while most people were playing defense. And so once sort of that ship was steered back in the direction of 100 studios, then I promoted our COO, who's the current CEO today. I moved into the exec chair role for the next couple of years, and then we sold the business.
God, I'm getting so fired up. I love this. I love this, and I love how you approach it. What would you boil down? Because you mentioned being a good wartime CEO. Like, how would you boil down like the most important characteristics to be able to like keep a level head and lead a team through times that are really tough? And I think that this translates a lot to a lot of people that listen to the podcast, because we talk about business a good bit. And I know we have some entrepreneurs that listen, but I think that this also applies to a lot of, husbands, wives, and like, how you operate as a family. So what would you say that boils down to?
Well, I remember, it was like, what's gonna kill us? If this is a war, right? And like COVID is the enemy here, what could put us in a deficit that we need to be on top of? And what came to the top of the list was the landlords, right? If they force us to pay rent, and sue us, and we have multiple lawsuits, and they're like saying, you guys need to pay rent regardless if you're open or not. Like, we had 75 locations. Like, I can't remember how much money in rent. I mean, it was millions of dollars, right? And I'm like, that will crush us. So we need to get the landlords on our side. We have to do face-to-face calls. We have to humanize us. We have to tell them, like, you convince them that we are going to make it through this. And we needed to be like, what's important to you guys? Like, yes, you could probably force us and sue us to pay rent over this time that we're closed. But if you do that, we're not going to survive. And if you also believe that this country will get through this, wouldn't you rather have us in this space for the 8 years that are left in our term? And how about we add another year on the back end, to it? Something that was giving them, we will make it up to you, but you can't force us, to give you cash that we don't have right now. Like, you'll sink the ship, and frankly, it's not going to benefit you. So that was like how I spent the majority of my time in the early days of COVID, was getting these deals done with landlords, me and our VP of legal, who's excellent. Her name's Dimple. And we just were like, how do we convince them? And we didn't have to pay 1 ounce of a rent when we were closed. It wasn't deferred. We literally just added time onto the back of the lease. And so we didn't get depleted in capital. And a lot of other fitness brands did, because they didn't know how to negotiate with landlords. They were just like bullied and like, well, they're telling us we have to pay rent. And I'm like, well, what if we didn't? What if we can figure out how not to? So that's part of it, Gabe, is like, when you're in a war, you have to look and say, how are we going to lose? And then that's where the energy and the effort went. And then on the flip side, or I guess in the same conversation, one of my top, if not my top leadership attributes is transparency. And not only did everybody know at the company that like Anne's going to sell this thing, when, like I told everybody, because I didn't want them to be surprised, and I wanted them to know that's what we're working toward. And the second one is like, I tell, like, we went through like, here's what the revenue is, guys. Here's what our profit is. Like, I just think sharing is caring. And like, the more that they knew about the business, the more that we could educate them on the business. So when COVID happened, I would hold weekly calls. And obviously we laid everybody off, and I just said, I'm going to have a weekly call. And if you guys want to join, obviously join, but like, I will tell you anything. And sometimes I showed up and I was like, I don't have any new news. I'm like, guys, we're still trying to sort this out. We are negotiating with landlords. And my commitment to all of them was that it is not my job to solve this moment in time. It is my job to make sure that you guys have a company to come back to work to after this is over. And you need to know that every decision that I am making is in support of that. And it's going to be painful in the moment, right? I can't pay you right now. You're going to have to go on unemployment. I'm going to have to lay you off, whatever. So explaining the decision making and letting people know why I was making the decision also kept our culture and community really strong.
Wow. Yeah. And I mean, I relate to that a lot. I mean, during COVID, we got hit so hard because at the time, we owned and operated. We had about 30 locations between corporate wellness and the ones that we owned, but 7 of them were in the Bay Area, California. And you talk about red state, blue state. And I mean, anyways, that was a really, 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 really difficult situation. But in hindsight, and I think there's a carryover to real life that I'd love to pivot into, when I hear you talk about kind of what's going to kill us, right? Quote unquote, wartime. And that's all relative for those of you, who have spent time in war. We're just using this as an analogy for business and life. But you're looking for the thing that's the most detrimental at the time.
Biggest threat.
Yeah. And so I'm wondering, how does that carry over when you talk about biggest threat with your relationship with your husband? And I'm really curious. I also saw something that you shared, and I was really, I really enjoyed this. You were talking about how you got married at 43, which I think for most people would say, hey, that's a little bit later than most people get married in general, right? But you said, hey, you had to focus on the standard for yourself and that the law of attraction will take care of itself. And so I'd love to talk about your relationship with your husband, how what is this thing that could kill you, kill the relationship? How are you focusing on that? And then what you meant by focusing on yourself and then the law of attraction occurs.
Yeah, I think, focusing on ourselves, right? A lot of people try to pretend to be X person, or, they'll be like, I want somebody who's super fit, but they're not fit themselves. I want somebody who makes a lot of money, but they don't make any money themselves. I just think I've been pretty good at putting myself out there, my whole self and who I am, and, working on myself, right? I got my heart broken when I was 35, and I never had done therapy before that. And I never had my heart broken before that. And I'm like, I don't want this to happen again. So I need to figure out, my part in this, because we loved each other like crazy. We fought all the time. Our relationship was the addiction. We had to go down so we could get up. And it was just so unsustainable. And I'm like, I don't want another relationship like that. I don't want to, because, all this fire and passion you feel for somebody, it can be really misconstrued of well, that's love. And I want to feel that. And if I don't feel that, it's not worth pursuing, so it's how do I navigate that system? So anyway, I went into therapy and did a lot of work on some issues that I felt like I inherited from my parents that I never dealt with. I realized I was a really bad apologizer, and that I really didn't forgive very well. And those two things were really detrimental to my relationship when I was 35. And it took a lot of work and unpacking. And it's really easy when we're talking about things and oh yeah, I do that. But applying them in the moment when your emotions are high. So it took longer than I think I would have liked to admit. But I needed to know what is my role? What harm could I bring into a relationship, that could cause it to be damaging? And those two things, not being able to apologize and not being able to forgive, are really hard characteristics to be in a relationship with somebody who can't master those things. So again, the commitment to myself to do the work there. And for Brett, I think a lot of our attraction, I'm really playful and silly. And I like to, I always say, I feel like I'm a 12-year-old boy. I want to play sports all day long. Anybody who's do you want to play Monopoly? I'm like, yes, it's 2:00 in the afternoon. I'll cancel my meeting. I'm really just sort of that way. And I've also had to be in my masculine a lot in my life of leading and making executive decisions and getting blowback and pushback and, not being amenable and pleasing everybody all the time. And when you're an entrepreneur, you guys can get this, like, it's hard to turn those buttons off. So I also started to do work on like the masculine and feminine polarity that needs to exist in relationships, because that's how my relationship before Brett ended. Like, that was so off for us. There was way too much femininity on his side, and I was still in my masculine, and like, we just neutralized each other. And so Brett and I really pay attention to that stuff. And I think that's the thing we talk about of like, if we didn't pay attention to that, because I am the wealthier one, right? Like, I'm a little more well known right now. You know, Brett's amazing at his career, and I know it's just going to continue to grow. But we have a little untraditional relationship as it relates to gender roles. And so him and I had to have, you know, that conversation of how is he going to feel masculine in our relationship, and how can I support that? And how am I going to be allowed to feel in my feminine and feel safe enough? Because as my therapist said, men really want three things with women. They want to protect, they want to provide, and they want to please. And so I have to make sure I'm creating space for Brett to do that. And two examples. One, Brett, we have a decent sized house, right? And Brett shuts down the house every night. He checks all the doors and he makes sure the security systems, you know, are set and the lasers are set. Like, of course I could do that, but I never ever do it because it's important to him. It's a way of protecting. The house is safe. We can go to sleep. You know, we have a shared account, you know, and like, putting our credit card down when we go to dinner. It's important for Brett to be able to do that. So I can either be like, this is stupid. Like, it's half my money too. I want to put the credit card down half the time. Or I can just be like, great. Like, that doesn't bother me. It doesn't threaten, you know, our relationship. And the last thing I will say, which, you know, Brett has given me permission to share this, you know, our prenup, I don't know if are you guys married? Yeah. I know you are, Jason, Gabe. So again, our wealth was very different. And when we were going through prenup stuff, I'm like, this is so stupid. So if normal prenups, if Brett and I get divorced and I have more money, I give Brett money because we got divorced. I'm like, and then we deal with this massive disparity in our relationship. So it feels like he has an allowance and feels like, you know, if we ever get divorced, he gets this consolation prize of millions of dollars. And I get, you know, I'm like, I'm not going to want to pay him if we get divorced. Obviously we don't want to be spending time together. So I was like, what if I give you money in our marriage? What if I gift you money that helps you build your wealth? You can invest it how you want. You can, you know, put it in your business, do whatever. But so that there's a little bit more financial security for Brett without him feeling like he's got to ask permission on the lifestyle that, frankly, I wasn't willing to negotiate on, because if we had to, you know, be and live in a place that was commensurate with Brett's, you know, compensation and salary, that's going to make me feel like my success doesn't mean anything. So I wanted to feel like we can live in a $12 million house and, you know, both enjoy it and feel like great and, you know, sell Solidcore and we get to do X, but also give Brett some money in our marriage so that he can feel, again, that like he's on more of an equal playing field. And that's been really amazing for us too. And I wish that more people would do prenups that way. And I wish lawyers would do more prenups that way.
Wow. I know, I mean, just like you guys all know, hundreds of couples, tons of couples, right? And I know multiple couples in very similar financial situations that you come from, and where, you know, there is that disparity. I've never heard it put like that. And I think that's a really interesting take. Obviously, I haven't been in that situation before, but I've never heard that. So I'm really happy you shared that here, because it could spark an idea for some in the future. And not to mention what you said, protect and provide, is so funny. It's on the back of my shirt right now. It's definitely a slogan we use here at Train Hard as key things that we think about of what men need to be doing. So thank you for that. Gabe.
Yeah. The one thing that I've just been thinking about this entire conversation, Anne, is everything that you've shared seems to come from like just an incredible level of self-awareness. Like, you constantly bring up that like, these are my big leadership roles. Like, these are the things that I've learned. And I know that that's come from a lot of really, really hard work. Obviously, you don't just like become self-aware of these things magically overnight. You have to do the digging. Therapy has obviously been incredibly useful. Like there's many ways to become self-aware of what are my strengths? What are my weaknesses? What do I need to work on? What do our relationship need to work on? What's maybe some advice for people? Because I do think that that's the first step to anything, to self-improvement, to improving your relationship. It's first having the self-awareness, because what I have to work on is very different than what Jason has to work on, very different than what you have to work on. And the only way to kind of figure that out is by doing that kind of like self-evaluation. Any like tactical advice there on how to get that or improve that specifically? Because I do think that that's kind of at the bedrock of a lot of the things you've shared.
Yeah. Well, listen, we all have repeatable patterns and issues that we are able to see and articulate. You know, if you stop and you reflect and be like, this keeps happening, or I get this feedback. And a great thing to do, like this, I didn't come up with this. A friend came up with this. She emailed 15 of her closest people, colleagues and friends and some family members, and just said, you know, how would you describe my biggest strengths? And what are some things you think that I could work on? And if you've got really good friends who know you really well, like they're pretty honest and you can see some themes there. And I thought, what a cool exercise to do if people are really going to be, you know, honest, and you can see some of that stuff, because sometimes obviously we don't see some of the things other people, you know, see, and we might not, you know, listen because we never ask the question. Like very few people ask their friends, like, hey, what's something I could work on to be a better friend, or that you see that I do that, you know, isn't serving me. So that's a really great exercise, I think, to start there. Or you could just do it to yourself, and you can see, man, like, here's where I'm falling short. You know, here's where, you know, I've got 4 relationships that haven't worked out, or, you know, have I really thought about my upbringing and my parents and how that's impacted me? You know, I'm a child of divorce, and like a lot of other people are out there. And it sounds so silly sometimes. I think people are like, oh my God, I'm impacted by my parents' divorce. But like, it's real and it's true. And our parents' behaviors, and most of that behavior, we frankly weren't even privy to because we were way too young to even remember it. But it's in us. And so having those conversations with our parents, and understanding them a little bit better, and your childhood, and asking questions, I also think is a really unbelievable exercise to do. And I'll tell you, like, a lot of men, and I love what you guys are doing, a lot of men will say things like, I think about my brother, who I love dearly, but whenever I try to give him feedback, it's just like, I am who I am, you know? And I'm like, you know, you guys laugh because you know it's true. And I'm like, don't you want to know why? Don't you want to know why you do these things and like where it comes from? Because when you have the knowledge, then you're empowered, and then you need to take the empowerment and put it into action. And one of those verticals people fail at. Either they don't do the work to understand, right? Or they understand so much. We all know those people, right? Who like listen to podcasts and do all the things, but like they never get to the empowered phase of like, I'm ready to make change and can articulate about themselves. And then the real hard part is the change, you know, itself. So I think those are all, you know, maybe some lessons that people could take away, and some examples if they're really serious about learning more about themselves.
Yeah, it's so self-limiting to have that mentality of like, well, this is just how I've always done things. Yeah. Like, you know, this is old ways die hard. I did want to bring up, you know, originally when I was like, hey, we need to have Anne on the podcast, it's this specific post came on my feed, and I really wanted you to elaborate on it a little bit, if you will, because we do have a very, you know, predominantly male audience. And you put up a post and said, this is some advice for the male population out there. Quality women want men, not boys. So when you act like a boy, you're going to attract a girl. And then the last sentence is, it's not a surprise to me that more women are choosing to be single today than ever before in history. We've leveled up, and we want men to do the same. So if you can, like, what can men do to level up? Because I mean, we agree, like we talk to men a lot, but I do think that there's so much room for improvement with, you know, dads and husbands and just men out there in general. So I'd love for you to just dive into this a little bit more.
Well, I'll tell you where, first off, that came from. And then I want to talk a little bit about Scott Galloway, if you guys know him. So this came from, I was spending time with some of my male friends, and we were in a beachy area. And, you know, a couple of my guy friends could not make comments about every single woman that walked by. And it was like, her body parts, right? Her butt, her legs, her this, her that, you know, and then it turned sort of sexual. And there was a comment that was made that literally caused me to get up and walk away from the table. And I'm like, you guys are children. You are behaving like children. And like, I am a woman, and I will not sit here and like tolerate it. And my friend, who was also there and was fed up with it, he's a Black gay male, and he's a really close friend of mine. And he goes, let me put this in perspective to you guys. Would you be sitting here making derogatory comments about Black people with me sitting here? And of course they're like, of course not. And they're like, how do you think Anne feels when you're sitting here making derogatory, childish comments about women? And they were like, oh my God, I can't believe whatever. And he goes, I'll take it a step further. Would you say it if I wasn't here? Would you be making derogatory comments about Black people if I wasn't here? And they go, no, of course we're not racist. And it's because their comments were like, oh yeah, we kind of forgot. Anne's just like one of the guys sometimes. We're so comfortable around her. And my friend was like, that is not excused behavior. Like, if you guys are going to get around and talk about women like this, and he joked and he's like, this is why you guys are all effing single. Like, you treat women, again, you're acting like boys, so you're going to attract girls. Like, I'm not telling you what to think, but when you can't control audibly what comes out of your mouth, and I told them, I was like, a different example would have been like, oh my God, that woman is stunning. I want to go talk to her. I would have been like, go talk to her, right? I would have encouraged that. But instead, you make some comment about her physical attribute in a way that wasn't classy. And then it was like wanting to have sex with her. So that's where that post came. And we had like heart to heart and they really listened, which was awesome. And they were like, holy shit, you're right. We are derogatory toward women. And it doesn't just happen. The fact that it's happening when Anne was here, and that we're all guilty of doing this with our guy friends because it feels cool and macho. I really think that they had like a little bit of a wake up call. So that's where that came from. And I felt like a little compelled to put that out there, because I've had so many conversations with women who are just like wanting men to level up. And the reason why I bring up Scott Galloway is because I find it so interesting. I agree with him that it's like, we need more strong men. I agree with that. But he does it in a way that like asking the population to like support, men becoming strong, and like, we need to help men become strong and blah, blah, blah. And when you're asking like women and other populations to kind of help men, we sort of are like, we didn't get any help. We had to come and fight for our seat at the table. We had to push and shove our way in, and we had to say, I'm smart and valuable, and I want to be paid X, Y, and Z. And so I can tell you as a woman, what quality women, like they say, like wife material women want. We want you to step up on your own. We don't want to like hold your hand and whatever. We want you to figure out how to be this strong, character. Like, this will sound, Gabe, I know you said you don't drink, but like my husband doesn't drink either. It's one of the sexiest things about it to me, because he's just like, that's not for, and it's not saying you not have to drink at all. But there's something very mature about Brett's approach of just like, you know what? When I drink, I become a boy, and I'm not going to do it. And I'm like, man, that's hot. Like, he just won't put himself in the situation because he doesn't have just one. He wants to have 10. And then he starts to behave poorly. And he's like, I'm just not that guy. And I'll give you, I don't know if you guys know who Sahil Bloom is, but I'm loving his new book. And he says something in there that I think everybody can take away, but is very applicable to this conversation. He has chosen an archetype for the kind of person he is. And his archetype right now is, I'm the kind of person who will coach my kids' sports teams. And so every decision that he makes comes back to, will a person that coaches their kids' sports teams do this? So that means, would they go get pissed drunk and then, at night and be hungover the next morning? Of course not. Like, that's not what somebody who coaches his kids' sports teams does. Will he take a business opportunity that could reputationally, maybe damage him? Nope, because he's the coach on the sidelines for his little kids. Will he take a job or take something that's going to pull him away for months from his family? Nope. And I think that's a really great framework for all of us to think about. Like, I'm the type of person who does X, Y, Z. And again, decision-making becomes a whole lot cleaner and more elevated when you're trying to live up to the archetype. Hopefully it's this person you respect and how that person would make decisions. Does that make sense?
Totally. Totally. And that idea of the life razor from Silo Bloom, I love that.
Yeah.
I haven't dove into the book, but I heard him on the podcast talk about it. And it's just so simple and so powerful, right? Like, just who do you want to be? Make all the decisions based off of that, like, ideal person. That's it.
Yeah. And it's like Brett's mantra is like, never miss a Monday. So like, no matter what, he works out, every Monday, no matter what. And like, I just think it really forces you when we don't want to do the thing. If the archetype is living on your shoulder, you're like, I gotta go. Like, if I break one commitment to myself, it's so much easier to break the second, and it's so much easier to break the third. And a pattern can happen like that quickly on a demise and on an uptick.
Yeah, I totally can connect with the idea of like embodying what you want your coach, right? Because so I have two kids, and my son in particular, he plays all the sports and at a competitive level. And to your point, it's so clear to me. Like if you're a guy out there listening and your son or daughter plays a sport and you look at the coach and you saw that person like out the night before at some weird, skimpy, like whatever, you'd be like, ooh, I don't know, man. Or the way that he treats the kids, the way that he treats his spouse, the way that name the thing. Like there's dozens of examples here, but that's what really, Gabe, we should totally embody some of that and use some of that and train hard. Cause I love that. I love that analogy. It's just such a clear example. It's like a one-liner, like, dude, be the dude that you'd want your kid to coach your kids. Like, okay. All right. I get that.
Yeah.
I love it.
And we all have to pick the archetype. And of course, the archetype changes based off of before kids, after kids, what's important to you. But, checking in every year and being like, is my archetype the same? Are my priorities the same? Have I changed? Do I want this to be it? I think it's really, really brilliant and a really simple way to keep yourself in line with the character you say you have.
And I want to be sensitive of your time, but I did have something I want to ask you about, which is the idea of knowing that you're going to win. And so something I think about when it comes to competing in fitness events over the years, is this idea of like putting in the work so you can have the earned confidence to feel like you've done the background, right? To feel like, dude, this isn't like perceived. Like I've earned this. I've done this from years of schooling, years of name the thing that you've done. To feel like when you take that first step to open up your new Pilates franchise or your business, that you knew you were going to win. I'm curious, like what developed that sense of confidence, and what advice would you have for someone who's interested in taking a leap from their current career or maybe starting a business? How did you feel that confidence that you knew you wanted to win or were going to win?
Yeah, I think it first happened in high school. So in junior high, there's a couple high schools in Bismarck, North Dakota. And back then you could actually, we all had territories, like I was supposed to go to this high school called Century High School. And I was in all of the basketball camps, I got to know kind of all of the players who were playing basketball, and all of the point guards, the good point guards, were going to Century. And I'm like, man, this is going to be like super competitive. And we were all kind of the same level. And the other high school was called BHS. And I'm like, nobody's going there. Nobody like in my grade that is a good enough point guard is going there. And I'm like, I'm going to go to BHS because I'm going to get more playing time. I probably can get some varsity in as a sophomore. My goal would be to start as a junior. And that's exactly what happened. And if I would have went to Century again, like who knows if I would have even played, because I was at the same level of these girls. And I wasn't going to get better if I wasn't going to get playing time and getting pressure and whatever, and stressful situations. So it was my first lesson when I was 16 of like, figure out a game that I can win, figure out how to play the game that puts me in a position to win. And I think I just continued to apply that, like graduating college in 3 years. I'm like, that makes me interesting. That gives me a leg up on like everybody else around me when I'm having conversations about jobs. When I was running marathons, I'm like, I love running marathons, but like, what if I ran one on every continent? That's an interesting data point that like, people are like, tell me about that. So I started to figure that out pretty quickly, that like, how do I up the ante a little bit if I'm going to do it anyway. And then with both Back on My Feet, and Solidcore, Jason, I felt with Back on My Feet, I'd worked in nonprofits. My dad's an addict. I know people respond to me in a way. I know how to build community. Like, if not, and I started to flip the script and be like, if not me, who? There's actually no better person to start and build this thing than me. And so when it was time again to leave back on my feet and think about what's my next thing, I had discovered the game that I'm really good at is building high quality experiential brands. And so when I took this Pilates class, I'm like, this is right in my wheelhouse. If I want to win at business, like this is the thing that I should do, or something in this realm, because my magic as a person is conducive to what is needed for that business to make it. Like, sure, it needs operations and HR and all of this stuff, but like every business does. But I knew Solidcore needed to be infused with community and personality and, of course, execution. And without that, it wasn't going to win. So, I'm literally not that book smart. I had to study really hard, like science, math, all of those things. Like, no, thank you. But I really worked on my emotional EQ and my personality and paying attention to the room and reading books like How to Win Friends and Influence People and understanding sales and what makes people like you. I mean, I sort of was like, I got to learn this stuff because these are the things that are going to put me in a position to win, because I don't have that other part of my brain with engineering, math, science, any of that stuff.
By the way, the last note that I wanted to bring up, and you just said it, was you mentioning that How to Win and Friends and Influence People is like the one book you read every couple of years. And talk about like, you said that on a clip, but like actually living it. Like, I don't think we've ever had, and Jason, correct me if I'm wrong, ever had a podcast guest that has said our names as much as you have throughout this conversation. And I can completely tell, because what you said in the clip was that, a person's name is their favorite word in any language. And it's actually a reason that you had, in Solidcore, that was a big thing. It's like using everyone's name and using it consistently. And I got to say, it makes you feel like we've known each other for a lot longer than we have. This is the first time we've ever talked.
Right.
When you're saying Jason and Gabe throughout this conversation, like it's made a noticeable difference. So to notice that after you saying that that's a book that you read every couple of years, it was an interesting note, because I mean, clearly you're reading it every couple of years. Clearly you're putting it into practice, and clearly it works. Like I can tell you, it felt like a much more, personal conversation that we're having just because of that fact alone. So that was pretty cool.
Well, thanks. I appreciate that, Gabe. But it's a layup for people. If you have a business, you guys, like, and this happened I was in Pasadena last week, and the server did it to me. He came over and he was like, "Hi, my name is Francis. What's your name?" And I'm like, "Oh, it's Anne. Nice to meet you, Francis." And like, I tipped that guy 100% because it literally made and I walked away being like, I really like that place. I liked it because he made me feel seen and he took the time to ask my name. And if you're looking for another great book, do you guys know Robert Cialdini?
Mm-hmm.
Oh my God. Okay. Add this to your list. It's Influence. It's all about the psychology behind human marketing and like why people do what we do, because we don't know it. Like I kind of told you the trick around names, but a lot of times people are just like, I really like her. Or, you don't know why. You can't really articulate it. But this book is full of all of those things of why people do what they do. And they have no idea. It's language. It's positioning. It's really, really good.
Writing it down.
I wrote it down too. And, for the record, Gabe, I totally picked up on that. And it's funny. Over the years, we've done many, 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 many podcasts. And I would say, without a doubt, this particular conversation has used our names more than any other I've seen. Now, that's not to say the other guests, because a lot of them we know really well as like really close friends of ours. But it doesn't change the fact that like I felt, to your point, seen, connected. And the fact that Gabe picked up on it, and so did I, tells me that like we need to go read these books once a quarter because there's something to it. So, Anne, I really, really, really appreciate your time. I knew I was going to be excited for this conversation. I think that this is one of those ones I'm going to go back, and I recommend everyone who's listening to this podcast now, go back and re-listen to it. I think there's some specific areas that we could all take into our lives and embody. And I really loved a lot of the different stories and insight that you shared, especially with your relationship with Brett. That was really cool. So thank you for sharing that. For people who are like interested in your story even deeper, I guess want to connect with you on a different level, where's the best place for them to go and find out more?
Yeah, well, one, I've been on a lot of podcasts, so you can just search my name, and there's a lot of great content out there where I try to, whenever I come on these things, it is about like less about my story and trying to share and be helpful. So thanks for asking such great questions. So you can just go search there on any podcast you listen to, and hopefully if you want more content on that. And then I'm pretty active on Instagram. It's kind of the only channel. There's just too many of them to keep up with. So I share a lot of a lot of what's on my mind. And again, trying to be helpful for anybody trying to level up their life, wanting a different life, empowering you to know you can create any life that you want for yourself, putting yourself in a position to win, and giving some, entrepreneur and business advice on there too.
Absolutely.
Awesome.
Well, for everybody listening, this is one of those ones, as per usual, right? If you got value from it, if you picked up something, share with a friend. The goal is to level everybody up. And so share with a friend, leave the podcast a rating and review. Make sure to go check out all the other podcasts and different content that Anne is sharing on Instagram. Keep training hard, keep getting after it, and we'll see you again next time for another great episode.